So we're looking at strategies everywhere, everything from preserving affordable housing, working with small businesses and entrepreneurs, helping residents to gain skills and the education and training that they need to secure living wage jobs. We're also investing in health care programs in schools and rec centers and the like. Our work impacts millions of people across the country. I just wanted to take a moment to share a few stats with you, acknowledging ahead of time that for all that we do, the scale of the problem is so immense that it really still isn't enough. But we still take pride in what we are able to accomplish. So with that, one of our signature strategies, which was actually innovated by the Social Innovation Fund a while back, is what we call financial opportunity centers. And here is where we are really serving hundreds of thousands of people to do financial coaching and education, helping them with financial stability types of training to help build credit, develop savings, and maybe even grow assets. This has been immensely successful because what we're finding is that the training is not just enough. And so when you combine the other aspects of financial feasibility focus for families, that you end up with folks who are really stay more attached to the workforce. We are also financing schools and daycare centers, over 400 affordable housing homes and apartments over the years, lots of community space that's really supporting some small businesses, arts and culture programs, recreation, and the like. On the policy front, what's becoming more and more interesting for us is how do we forge more multi-sector partnerships, and especially I'll call out a growing partnership between ourselves and the health systems sector. And just yesterday, as a matter of fact, we announced a partnership with Centera Health System and Optima Health in Hampton Roads, a $100 million investment under the banner of social determinants of health. The healthcare center recognizing that perhaps the issues that impact health might have a lot to do with things like housing and jobs, educational levels, and neighborhood conditions. And so more and more that's become a focus. I'll just end my introduction by just focusing just a little bit on the small business sector. Just to say that we've been investing in business type ventures with not-for-profits over the years, are really forging more of an effort to focus on small businesses. Later on, I could talk more about what's in our way. But at the end of the day, the question for us around full employment, attachment to the labor market, the impact that this has on our families, we are beginning to call our work on the economic development and employment front a focus on the social determinants of employment. And so I'd like to be able to share more about that as we talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. So I'm Chad Moutre. I'm the Chief Economist at the National Association of Manufacturers. Today is Manufacturing Day, so happy Manufacturing Day. We're having about 2,800 events plus around the country really to celebrate manufacturing, to celebrate its importance in the overall economy, and hopefully to change people's minds about it being a great career to go into. It's also, next year is our 125th anniversary, so the NAM was founded in 1895 in Cincinnati, and so you'll be seeing a lot from us. Just think Got Milk, but for manufacturing. Over the next year, lots of activities planned under the Creators Wanted banner, with an event kind of culminating next year in September. I think, again, South by Southwest, except for manufacturing in Cincinnati in September. So that's all kind of exciting. So I'm Chief Economist at the NAM. I'm the chief and only economist. But I also straddle over into the Manufacturing Institute, which is our 501c3, which really dedicates itself quite a bit to the issue of the skills gap and finding training. So we know, for instance, that the inability to find talent is the #1 issue for our members. It's trade as well, but certainly we hear an awful lot about just the fact that there's just not enough talent out there, and we'll be talking about that, I'm sure. And the Institute is doing a number of things in that space. including working to create more veterans, to attract more veterans to go into manufacturing, to attract more women to go into manufacturing. We just acquired the FAME program from Toyota. So that's helping to expand apprenticeships in the manufacturing space. And so there's a number of things that we are doing besides Manufacturing Day, which is hopefully helping to highlight that as a sector and as a career.
Hi, how are you? My name is Melinda Mack. I'm the Executive Director of New York State's Workforce Development Association, also known as the New York Association of Training and Employment Professionals. It's that name because it was founded in 1978, and so we could have a much snazzier name if we renamed it now. So similar to some of the other groups that are up here, our organization is focused primarily on education, job training, and employment services. So I represent around 200 members who serve over 1.5 million New Yorkers each year around education, job training, and employment. It includes our community college systems, our local workforce development boards, career centers, many community-based organizations and providers, and labor unions. I think for us, the conversation for me is I'm thrilled to be here and also excited that you're seeing this dual mandate as a critical role and aspect of the work that you do, primarily because it's not just about maximum employment, it's about meaningful employment. And so I think I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about today what we're seeing on the ground when it comes to the quality and the types of jobs that many of our members are seeing. Folks who typically aren't entering into the labor market, what they're accessing and their ability to move up, as well as the wages associated with that work. Our job in our state has been to be sort of the primary advocates for the job training component, but also this concept of really thinking thoughtfully about the connection between economic and workforce development. Similar to Denise, this movement towards capital-driven workforce development, meaning human capital-driven workforce development and economic development, is critical. I think for too long, the piece of the pie has been just around the built space, not recognizing the impact on the people who live in those communities, right? And so I think we're sort of seeing a movement towards that in New York State, but more broadly, this thoughtfulness around what does it mean to live and work and grow in a community along with the built environment. So again, I'm happy to be here, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much. My name is Sarah Horowitz, and I'm the CEO of Trupo, which is a startup in New York, and we are providing the next civic infrastructure for this new workforce. I'll tell you a little bit about my history and how we got there, because I think that would be helpful. I started the Freelancers Union about 20 years ago with the realization that the workforce that was not the traditional employee workforce where people go to one job for 40 hours a week, are able to access training programs and other kinds of services, are really left to figure this all out for themselves. Where are we now? It's about 1/3 of the workforce and growing. And what is so important is that we're starting to understand it. I think the first bite that we've taken is to think about it as the gig economy. But the gig economy is really about 6% of the economy. It's really the people who are working on the platforms, and it's very litigated right now as to whether these workers are independent contractors or employees. But if we start to move from this little bite size and go across, we see that actually we're talking about a very robust part of the economy that crosses class and economic lines, it crosses skill lines, it crosses regional lines, race, gender. And so really what we're talking about is the future. And so when I was at the Freelancers Union, I started the work as Lisa and I, who you'll hear from next time, and others were talking about what is going to be the next safety net. And that really was the thread to start to build the first portable benefit systems that built on the great work of the building trades unions and the entertainment unions.
The world is addicted to a potent psychoactive drug. It is by far the most popular drug in the world. The average person consumes over 300 milligrams of it every day. Yet it does stuff to your brain and your body. That will shock you. I am of course talking about caffeine. But how does caffeine work? And what's the worst thing it can do to your mind and your body? And could it kill you? Firstly, how does this drug work? How does it perk you up in the morning?
Well, the US
every
Justice
minute you are
Department
awake, your body
is
is
facing a
releasing a chemical
deadline
called
to
adenosine
hand
into your
over
bloodstream.
all
Adenosine can be
information about the whistleblower complaint that sparked Donald Trump's impeachment inquiry. The House Intelligence Committee conducting the inquiry against the president says it wants all the material by Friday. That comes as Ukraine's new top prosecutor says he'll be reviewing 15 or so cases which were handled by his predecessors, and it includes the criminal case involving a natural gas company that employed the son of former US Vice President Joe Biden. Meanwhile, House investigators have released several text messages between state department officials. It was about withholding aid to Ukraine. The former special US envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, handed over the texts when he testified before 3 committees on Tuesday. And Vice President Mike Pence is now under the spotlight as well after reports Trump also involved him in efforts to pressure Ukraine's president. Pence, though, defending the president's call for some foreign investigation.
I mean, the fact that my predecessor had a son who was paid $50,000 a month to be on a Ukrainian board at the time that Vice President Biden was leading the Obama administration's efforts in Ukraine, I think is worth looking into. And the president made it very clear that he believes our other nations around the world should look into it as well.
Here's our correspondent on this story, Heidi Jo Castro's at Capitol Hill, where more impeachment hearings are expected. I'll be with you shortly. Heidi, we're starting though at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the White House. Our correspondent there is Kimberly Halkett. So Mike Pence getting drawn into all of this, the vice president, and then the president himself with more to say.
Yeah, that's right. There's new reporting that U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, in fact, had knowledge of that now infamous July 25th phone call between Donald Trump and the Ukrainian leader. And what is not clear from the reporting is whether or not he had any knowledge of the request allegedly made by Donald Trump to, in essence, investigate his political rival, Joe Biden. Well, Donald Trump has been talking about this with reporters. He says that he has a right and duty to investigate, which he says
institution. About 70% of our students receive Pell Grants, which essentially means they're coming from the lower income levels.
Are, spring with right in the name, frameworks of metal atoms connected to each other with organic linkers. This structure makes them porous, like a sponge, giving them incredible surface areas. A single gram of a MOF can have the surface area of a football field, and depending on the metal and organic molecules they're made of, they can be tailored to capture different things in their pores. MOFs have potential uses capturing CO2 and turning it into the fuel methanol, or neutralizing nerve agents like sarin gas. The function of Berkeley scientists tuned their MOF for was extracting water vapor present in the air. The first one they made in 2014, called MOF 801, was zirconium-based. When tested in a water harvester, it worked entirely passively, absorbing and condensing water overnight and giving up again when the sun warmed it up. So the concept worked and used a lot less energy than the other way of extracting water from low humidity air, which involves cooling the air and low freezing. But zirconium is expensive, so scientists set to developing MOF 303 based on a much cheaper element, aluminum. Not only is the new MOF cheaper, it also performs much better. It can hold 30% more water and fill up and empty in just 20 minutes in the right conditions. And because the MOF was designed to leave no traces of organic or inorganic material in the water, it's completely pure and drinkable right away. Using the same passive technique and harvester left overnight in the Arizona desert, 1 kilogram of MOF 303 harvested 0.2 liters of water. Now, I know what you're thinking, that doesn't sound like a lot of water, and you're right. But the good news is the aluminum-based MOF's ability to fill and empty in minutes can be exploited. The scientists changed up their design. Instead of passively relying on a day-night cycle, their latest harvester relies on solar-powered fans and heaters to run dozens of cycles a day. Ideally, it can make more than 1.3 liters of water per kilogram of MOF each day. And the researchers hope to get that number as high as 8 or 10 liters per kilogram. The lead researcher behind this has started a private company called Water Harvesting. The plan is to launch a microwave-sized device that can supply 2 adults with enough drinking water for their daily hydration and cooking needs. Eventually, they envision a harvester big enough to supply a small village. If the devices are affordable, safe, and reliable enough, these metal organic frameworks have the potential to turn even the driest deserts into oases. Clean drinking water has always been a challenge for humanity, and sometimes we make mistakes, like when we decided lead pipes were a good idea. Thankfully, researchers are developing ways to render the poisonous pipes harmless. Amanda has more here. If you like this video, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Seeker.
Zapping water with electricity could save your life. Not something you thought we'd ever say? We're pretty shocked too. By introducing an electric current into lead pipes filled with a harmless phosphate solution, researchers at UC Berkeley were able to rapidly form a protective coating around corroded lead pipes, reducing leaching of this toxic element by roughly 99%. Lead exposure is a huge public health issue according to the World Health Organization. Paint and dust laced with lead are the most common sources of exposure, but contaminated water is another big issue. In the US alone, over 5,000 water systems violate the EPA's Safe Drinking Water Act, placing an estimated 18 million people at risk. And lead poisoning is no joke. This chemical element can accumulate in our body over time, leading to kidney damage, reduced IQ, increased risk of cancer, stroke, and even death. That's all thanks to lead's sneaky ability to mimic and inhibit calcium, break through the blood-brain barrier, and result in the misfiring of neural signals, impairing our ability to learn and develop.
More from Paddy Culhane in Washington on this one. Paddy, it sounds interesting. Tell us more detail.
Well, it's interesting in the sense that this is a much different response from a tech company that we saw, let's say, in the 2016 election. This is Microsoft saying, because this is such an important issue, we are going to take this unusual step of notifying people that this has happened. And again, this is Microsoft making the claim that they believe this group that they are labeling phosphorus can be linked back to Iran and the Iranian government. Important to point out, they have not offered any proof of that. But the allegation is that it wasn't a particularly sophisticated attack, but that this group looked at about almost 2,700 people, and they tried to identify information about them, their phone numbers, what maybe their email addresses were. Then they tried to hack into those, possibly using secondary emails that are associated with that account, trying to find phone numbers for that two-part authentication that we all have to use now. And so they tried this with 2,700 different names. They targeted, according to Microsoft, 241 people, and were very successful, at least according to Microsoft. Again, they're saying that they were able to gain access to about 4 accounts, and they say none of those were related to the presidential campaign. Still, this is obviously something that Microsoft is trying to send the message. They say that this was a presidential campaign. They're not saying which one. Current and former government officials, journalists, and also prominent Iranians living in America. So this is a new step we're seeing from the tech companies, but we expect more of this as the election campaign gets underway.
Thank you for the update, Paddy Culhane in Washington for us. Now, hundreds of Facebook and Instagram accounts, pages and groups have all been removed for what the tech giant is calling coordinated, inauthentic behaviour. Facebook says the accounts ran misinformation campaigns, mostly targeting the Middle East and North Africa. Most supported the UAE, Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and were critical of Qatar, Iran and Turkey. Dozens targeting Indonesia were also removed. Now, hosts Qatar are hoping for a golden night at the World Athletics Championships here in Doha. With a preview, here is Farah Ismail.
Yes, Kamal, it's all eyes on the high jump. It's the first of 6 titles up for grabs later here at the Khalifa International Stadium. Home favorite and defending champion Motaz Issa Barshim is in action right now in the final of the high jump. We'll have the latest on that final. And conditions for the road races have proved testing for the athletes so far at these championships. They return later with the men's 20-kilometer walk. We'll also have action from the Rugby World Cup. Join us here at the Khalifa International Stadium in about 20 minutes.
OK, look forward to that. Farah Ismail there. And still ahead in the news, for the first time in more than a century, an ancient tradition goes back to Ethiopia's capital. And the conservation efforts that have led to this species making a giant comeback.
Hello there. We have got some rain across the Middle East. It's not exactly widespread. You can see where the cloud is across more areas.
Jobs. So whether in some cases we're attempting to create those jobs, and then we have maybe a better opportunity to attach people that we want to serve. But in many instances, we're working in the market, and the goal is to figure out how to make a person attractive to an employer. Another sector that's really starving for workers is the construction industry. Lots of skilled jobs that are going unfilled. In some cases, like for welders, for example, not a very long training program that's involved, but still it's a barrier to people who for all the other reasons need to have that job that might pay less, but it's available right now and they don't have to go through the training. So on the employer side, there are probably way too many jobs, and I think that's a reason for us to put a lot more time and attention on how to break down the barriers and attach people to work. The opportunities exist. While this market is strong, it'll be a different, as you said, it'll be a different ball game when the market changes, and so we're losing a lot of time in a way that we don't have stronger strategies to remove these barriers.
Now.
Greg.
Yes, please. I completely appreciate what Denise is saying around particularly the opportunities and the barriers that exist, particularly when you talk about post-secondary attainment. Some of the barriers are a little amorphous, right? You're talking about communities that they don't have family members who've gone to college, they don't have neighborhoods, they don't have friends that they can rely on, and don't necessarily perceive college or post-secondary attainment as an obvious next step for them in life. And in the worst case scenarios, like many of the students who are with us, they may have been told that they're not capable. So we're trying to address some of those more amorphous challenges, but then there's just the reality of I can't get from one place to the next. And perhaps it's because our students are average age 27 years old, they're working, they're part-time, they have children, they have a lot of other obligations. And so one of the things that we think about doing is how do we make sure that we are actually penetrating communities and making sure we're doing the best that we can to ensure that opportunity is available to us. Most of us in this room probably have college degrees. If we have children, we've probably talked to our children at a very young age about the potential for them to achieve post-secondary education. And so we're not necessarily going to be in everyone's homes, but as a post-secondary institution, we talk about how we can own some of this challenge. And so when I became president last year, one of the things that I asked our team to do immediately was, notwithstanding the 3.3% unemployment rate, to take a look at what are the college-going rates and post-secondary attainment rates, as well as the unemployment rates in every city and every zip code in Broward County. And as Denise mentioned, notwithstanding that broad-based, very healthy unemployment rate, we saw a number of zip codes with 10+% unemployment. And of course, the corollary was that they had very low post-secondary attainment rates. And if you talk to our students, you'll hear the voices of students who say, I walk 4 miles every day to get to class. Well, I love the will that that student has, but there is realities that many folks cannot overcome that distance. And so what we've actually started to do is actually bring post-secondary education into the communities that need them most. Oftentimes we sit and wait and say if the students can get to us, then we'll take care of those, and if you can't, well, I hope you can figure it out. And one of the things that we're hoping for on a broader scale, but certainly we're doing at Broward College, is saying what of these challenges can we own? One, if we go into your community, the heart of a community where perhaps it's $24,000 a year is the average income for the family. If we can place ourselves in the center of those communities and live there and provide post-secondary attainment, not bounce in and out, but to live in those communities so that when a student or a mother or a father is walking between their home and the bus station, they know that post-secondary opportunity is available right in their community. And so in the last year or so, we've been able to do this, and we've been able to grow some of this work as well. Now, many would think, are you going to have a new building there, particularly at a time when per capita funding for state colleges is down? No, we're not going to be able to do that. But there is the opportunity to partner. And so we've been partnering with organizations like the Boys and Girls Club and the Jack and Jill Children's Center and library systems where we can actually live in those organizations, providing classes that can be available to the parents of the kids that are typically served in those organizations. Or you look at the library system, which is typically underutilized. They have space for classrooms, they have technology, the infrastructure is there, and so we've partnered with classrooms and organizations like the Urban League, which have been great partners. And not only that, we're watching municipalities really engage. They know their constituency. They know what their numbers are. They know the pain that their citizens are going through. But most importantly, they know that if post-secondary opportunities were available, they could change the face of their communities. And so now we're partnering with municipalities, providing classes and coursework living in those communities that are embracing us. And so in the last year alone, we've been able to serve nearly 700 students by way of going through these programs. We're now getting the stories coming in where students are going through the programs. In fact, some of them have lost jobs. They've been able to get a certificate, just a certificate, in supply chain management or IT or aviation, and be able to now translate that certificate into jobs making $50,000, opportunities that otherwise would not be there. So I think about how we can be more creative about getting into those communities where we know those attainment rates are very low. And then even from a policy perspective, how do we own that? What are we trying to do for attainment rates in those most challenged communities? How are colleges trying to increase their enrollment of students from those most challenged communities? And then, of course, as we look at social mobility and economic mobility, how well are colleges playing in that space? The program we've designed is called Broward Up, designed for students who are coming from these communities. UP standing for Unlimited Potential, with the recognition that everyone has the ability, but the limitations on opportunity are what we need to be embracing on behalf of our students and working with them to ensure that the opportunity is there.
Sarah, I'm going to just ask you to reflect a little bit on the kinds of work workforce attachments, the folks that you're focused on, does that vary over the course of the cycle? Are there more people that might be freelancing or sort of self-employed now, or perhaps at the depths of the recession, or is this just a structural trend?
Yeah, if I can just go back for one thing, I think one thing that's interesting as we are as a panel sort of seeing the 360 as the whole, I would say that freelancers really are, there is a lot more work than there was certainly after, the recession. The real story, I think, is the hollowing out of the middle class, that they're really not making the same amount of money in real dollars, which I think is shocking. So I speak with so many freelancers, and what they will say is, I'm a graphic designer, I'm a content provider, I literally am making less money than I did before. And because they're independent contractors, they don't have the right to unionize. And so it's very difficult for them to engage in any kind of collective relationship, which would have the effect of bringing up those wages. Now, what I think is interesting is that you could almost see the rate at which freelancing has gone up nationally if you look sector by sector. So if you looked at it maybe in the 1970s, you'd be seeing it in media and publishing. But now what you see is that almost every single sector has a freelance component to it. So I think that's one thing. The second is I think that we're just seeing the rise of just an incredible number of work platforms that are coming out, so that there's a way, if you don't have the network, that you can enter into. And that's a whole other conversation, but I think that that's a change, and that's how people are coming in. And then moonlighting. People are having a side hustle, trying to figure out, is there an opportunity for that? So I think the real answer in a sentence is yes, it really is structural, it really is changing, but you're seeing the nuance within. I think the really hard question is, how are we measuring it, and how much is enough? And when I was trying to think about that and coming over here, I wondered if we could channel the people who came up with the consumer price index. Let's just take that cart and go around the supermarket and figure it out. And I think that that's the kind of exercise that we're going to have to ask ourselves as a country, which is, how much is enough? And I would say that what is enough? That I have affordable health care, that I have an affordable place to live, that I'm not in debt, that I have enough that gives me some sense of security and optimism. What that is what it's going to be the defining question of this next era, I think.
In that spirit, Sarah, what in your thinking or experience accounts for the decline in wages at a time when the rest of the labor market's getting tighter and tighter and wages are moving up, but among freelancers? Yeah.
So I as I see my friends from the AFL-CIO, I would have to say that number one is really a lack of organization, and that typically one of the major pathways to the middle class, meaning how we increase wages, is through unions. And I just don't see how you read history any other way. So I think that's one. And then I think there really is so many people, it's so easy. I'll give you actually a good example. When I've been talking to freelancers and talking to people who are voiceover artists, what they'll tell you is, it's a skill, and if you're great, but the technology is so simple to get into the market that anybody can buy the technology, put it in a quiet room, and you're a video artist, and you can undercut the other people who have been doing it a much longer time. I think that's an example of technology. Completely.
Technology. Interesting.
One other, just in the middle class, I think many people left the status they had when the market changed, and they never got it back. They never got back the job that they had before the market went down. And that, I think, is contributing to the growth in the industry where people have become entrepreneurs, because that became a better alternative to the job that they once had that just never came back.
Maybe some structural forces, and then accelerated by that really sharp downturn. Let me turn to Chad and ask you to reflect on the flip side of it from the employers. So is there evidence that the tightening of labor availability? Is that giving greater bargaining power to some of the workers? Are you seeing actual wage and employment benefits demands going up in a noticeable way? So are there pockets in the economy where you can see those kinds of pressures?
So you noted earlier, Governor Brainerd, that we got job numbers today, so obviously they were negative for manufacturing, and we've seen a softening overall in manufacturing growth this year, about 4,500 this year on average per month relative to last year was 22,000, so the best really since 1997. And I also noted earlier that really for 8 straight quarters we've seen our manufacturers say that this is the top issue, right? The inability to attract and retain labor. I hear it also from construction workers and from housing, truck drivers, et cetera. So you continue to hear this, especially in that tight labor market. One of the numbers from JOLTS that I think is interesting to kind of get to your point is that last month, I think it was July, which is the JOLTS data, the most recent, you had an all-time high level of quits. Right, so this is the take your job and shove it measure. That's how I describe it to a lot of our audiences. And so that to me suggests that there's a lot of churn out there in the overall labor market. I was hearing as much as, especially last year, a lot about poaching, people going on LinkedIn, finding who your competitors have. You see that kind of moving from place to place. And I think manufacturers are really sensing that in a real way. In those same JOLTS data, 522,000 job openings last month. That's an all-time high. So you do have kind of this strange juxtaposition between slowing hiring in general with the fact that there's job openings which are at an all-time high, and that's a large part of why we're doing Manufacturing Day. But I think the other part of it, there are some structural issues here at play as well. I was talking to Nancy earlier about the fact that we have about 35% of our members who say that they want people who are almost eligible for retirement to stick around a little longer, right? Because there's not necessarily a next generation of worker waiting in the wings to take those jobs, and so you don't want to lose that institutional knowledge. You don't want to be able to lose that talent. And we actually did a study founded by the Sloan Foundation, really to look at what manufacturing members were doing, really with that aging workforce to try to get them to stick around a little longer, but also some of them were doing phased retirement, some of them were doing mentoring of younger workers. So I think all of those things are kind of at play. And then the other structural thing that I'll say is that there are perceptional issues about manufacturing. People still think it's dark, dirty, and dangerous. I think that's partly the truck driver issue as well. Not to pick on them. But I think changing those perceptions is huge, and convincing folks that, no offense, Greg, but you don't need to have necessarily a college degree. There are many people, I have a PhD, so it certainly is good for some folks, but not everyone has to go and get an actual college degree. There's certifications out there, there are apprenticeships that you can get. There's other forms of trade schools, trading that you can get that I think are also helpful. And so changing those perceptions, I think, goes a long way. I was meeting with a group of manufacturing employees, I think it was last week or so. None of them obviously were on the shop floor. They were all doing accounting and government relations and other stuff. And I said, I won't say who the company was, but I'll say, do you think of yourself as being a manufacturing employee? And of course they don't, right? They're doing accounting or whatever else. And I said, but you are. You are in the NAICS code of 31 to 33. So I think changing those perceptions, I think, is another kind of structural hurdle that I think we're trying to overcome.
Melinda, just to speak a little bit, are employers working harder to partner and find workers, upskill them, pay them more? Are you finding that really change in the intensity with which people are trying to find skilled workers and invest in skilled workers?
So I think the answer is sometimes, because I think it depends on the sector or the industry. I want to take a giant step back just to be really clear on what we're talking about. In our state, 41% of New Yorkers have a high school diploma or less. That's not uncommon across the nation, right? And so when we're talking about even being able to access something like community college, it's a very large leap to get from low basic skills into meaningful employment. The other piece, just to juxtapose, is that the top growing jobs in our state pay less than $27,000 a year. And so when you add on the transportation costs, the childcare costs, the additional skill-based training cost, it is not fathomable or possible in many ways for folks to find this pathway. And so I think one of the things that we're finding as we talk with folks, this idea of a good or better job is meaningful. Many folks who are working are not working in great jobs, or they're working in multiple part-time jobs. And so in our state, about 250,000 folks are in part-time jobs. I imagine that many are piecing together full-time work as using sort of many sort of part-time job opportunities. When you think about that and think about when would you have the chance to go to Greg's college, right? It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I was just with someone earlier today talking about, in particular, some of the most difficult occupations, like caregiving occupations, home health care, child care providers, direct support professionals. The wages are dictated by Medicaid, right? And so the ability for you to even be able to raise wages associated with those really critical positions in our economy are very limited. So to say, are people engaged? Yes, for the most part, but I still think we're struggling with this concept after the recession where folks had credential creep, where folks sort of crept up and said, what you need to do this job is an associate's degree or a four-year degree, or some sort of credential, where ultimately you're working as a cashier. You probably don't need an associate's degree. On top of that, I think the other issue we're finding, and I'd be interested to hear your take on this, as we move from advanced manufacturing into lean manufacturing, people are really tight on their line.